All right, looking at 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 8 through 37. The first question, when did the Shunammite woman realize Elisha was a holy man of God? This is right in the beginning of the passage. She says in verse 9 to her husband, behold, now I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which passes by us continually. But to know when she realizes this, we have to go back to verse 8. Verse 8 says that Elisha passed by, this is a certain day, Elisha passes by this great woman of Shunem. She constrains him to eat bread. And then it says, as often as he passed by, he turned in there. And then verse 9 says, she realizes one day that this is a holy man of God who passes by her continually. So it's not the first day that she realizes he's a holy man of God, not even the second time, because if it were the second time, it would have said the second time she realized this is a holy man of God who has passed by us these two times, or who came to us this time and the last time. But it says as oft as he passed by. So it's at least more than two, likely more than three times that he's visited this woman. And she says he passes by us continually. So it's at least more than three times that he's visited them, stayed in their home, and then she realizes this is a holy man of God. And that's the second question, about how long had she been showing him kindness before this? Was it minutes, hours, days, weeks, or months? Well, it was not minutes, obviously, not hours, maybe not days, likely I'd say weeks or months, because Elisha was not living in Shunem. He was coming and visiting Shunem on occasion. And if we said it's at least three times, likely more than three times, that he's already visited her. He's visited her, goes away, does something somewhere else, and then comes back again, visits her, goes away, and comes back again multiple times. It's likely not back-to-back visits. It's likely over the course of weeks. We're saying at least three, so that would be at least 3 different weeks if they're back-to-back at all. I think it's more likely, more reasonable to conclude that it's over the course of months, many months, maybe even over a year, that he's been visiting this woman, staying in her house for extended periods of time, leaving and coming back, and then she realizes, wow, I think this is a holy man of God. Now, this says a few things about both of them. The first thing I want to highlight is what it says about Elisha. Imagine the scene. Elisha, the prophet, the mighty man of God, the man who is able to do great miracles by his hand, by calling on the name of God. Not only that, he's the descendant of the prophet Elijah. He follows the prophet Elijah and has seen Elijah do great and wonderful things. But somehow, over repeated visits, not just visits, but over repeated times of him living in the home with this woman, she didn't hear those great stories of the things he'd seen. She didn't hear him talk about how he saw Elijah go up to heaven in a chariot of fire. She didn't hear him talk about the time when he boldly went before the king and rebuked kings and was able to tell them what they ought to do and what they ought not to do. She didn't hear those stories about what he saw done by the hand of his predecessor, Elijah. Somehow, Elisha, in living in this woman's house, kept those things to himself. Those weren't the forefront things of his conversation. It wasn't the things he talked about. When he walked into her house, he said, hey, hi, it's me, Elisha. Remember me, the mighty man of God? What are you going to do for me now? How are you going to serve me, knowing who I am? In our modern time, it'd be very difficult for this to take place because we're pretty familiar with all the celebrities. They're on television, they're on the internet, they're on pictures. Somehow we can see them. But in this time, they didn't know. They definitely would have heard of Elisha, definitely would have heard of Elijah, but she didn't know who this was, and he didn't take it on himself to bring it out. He didn't give her his business card and say, look, this is me, Elisha, PhD. He didn't look and say, hey, this is me. I graduated summa magna up to cum laude. This is me, Elisha, the great mighty man of God. No, in over a year, likely, of interacting with Elisha, she did not know who he was. We see this even of Jesus, that people are around him and he's able to have such a, what we call down-to-earth demeanor, that they don't feel intimidated by him. They don't even realize that they're talking to the Son of God. Jesus didn't have a badge. Jesus didn't have a business card that said, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus walked as one of the people. It was so common that his disciples, Peter, was even able to rebuke him, thinking him to be just a simple man. But this is the way that he expects, Jesus expects we his followers to behave. That people ought not to find out the first thing they know about me. This is Ian, such and such and such and such. This long everlasting title, or a long list of all the things I've accomplished, or a long list of the things that distinguish me and make me better than other people. After over a year of living with Elisha, spending time significantly with Elisha, living in her home, she did not even know he was a prophet. And I think this speaks very greatly to what God would have us to do and how he would have us to demonstrate our greatness or our supposed greatness. The next point this illustrates is about her, the woman herself. That's what did Elisha offer her for her kindness, and what was her response? Well, the question I wanted to highlight from this, I want to skip actually to question 5. Do you think Elisha was the only person she showed kindness to? And that's going back to what this says, the fact that she didn't even know he was a man of God when she showed him this kindness. No, she did not know that he was a man of God. And so it's likely that she just showed this kindness to everyone she met. It was not because she hoped to receive something of him, not because she hoped to receive favor with God, not because she hoped to receive favor with the king, that she showed this kindness. She did this because this is who she was. This nomad, this wanderer, this man, this crazy looking man, this man without job, maybe he is in need physically, materially. She says, I'm going to show kindness to him, and turns out to be the prophet. And I think this is, again, what we can learn from this, jumping all the way to application, that we ourselves ought to show kindness indiscriminately to all, not just hoping that this person can show us kindness in return, but just showing kindness because that's the way that Jesus has treated us. Despite our lack of worthiness, despite our lack of any ability to pay him back, Jesus has shown kindness to us. And so we also ought to show kindness to all those with whom we associate. Going back to the questions, her response in number 3 is the question we're looking at. Her response was, I dwell among my own people. I don't need anything. He said, what can I give you? I don't need anything. You can't imagine anyone who would really say, I don't need anything from the king. That's what he says. Should I talk to the king or to the captain of the guard for you? Is there anything you need? And she says, no, I dwell among my own people. It's not, I don't believe it's because she really didn't need anything. Even the rich need something. And she was obviously very well to do. The fact that she's able to invite Elisha and Gehazi into her home at any time, and then even able to build. That means she had land to be able to add on an addition to her home, and it was an addition capable of housing both Elisha and his servant, Gehazi. She's able to add that, and he's not paying rent, and he's not even there all the time. So definitely she's very well to do. But even though she's well to do, that definitely isn't enough to say she doesn't need anything, because even the rich, even the wealthy would be better off if they had the favor of the king. If someone spoke to the president on behalf of a rich person, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. But she, I believe, says she doesn't need anything because she was content. And I believe that's why God was able to bless her with the things that she had, because she was content with what she had. And that's probably another video. But I think that's another lesson we can draw from this woman's example here. Jumping back to the questions, what did she receive as a result of her kindness? We know the story. She receives a son, even though her husband is old. And also in 2 Kings 8, verses 1 through 6, God miraculously spares her from the famine and then even restores her land to her later, which is all stemming from the fact that she had showed this kindness to Elisha. The 6th question, what can her life teach us about kindness and its possible results? If she did not show this kindness to Elisha, I believe God would have provided for Elisha's needs some other way. But because she showed this kindness to Elisha, God not only provided for Elisha's needs through her, but also that was a means of blessing her life, of giving her a son, giving her the joy of having a child, and even seeing that child raised from the dead. And even later in chapter 8, as I mentioned, that God protected her from the famine, that she didn't lose all of those possessions God had blessed her with. And then even when she returned after the famine, then she was restored. God blessed her through her act of blessing another. And I think that's one lesson we can see, that sometimes, and it's not all the time, and that's not the reason we should show kindness, but sometimes God blesses us through our acts of blessing others and showing kindness. Lastly, what should motivate us to show kindness? I want to read a passage of counsel from Jesus himself. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus he's talking to some people at a dinner, and he says, in verse 12 of Luke chapter 14, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. Jesus is saying, don't show kindness to those who could possibly show kindness to you. Now, he's not really saying don't show kindness to them, but he's saying if you want to show the real kindness, if you want to do something significant before God, don't show kindness to those who may be able to repay you. Rather, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Show kindness to those who are not able to show kindness back to you, who are not able to repay you, and then you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. That's the kind of kindness that is of value in the sight of God, the kindness that cannot be repaid here on earth, the kindness that is a kindness in faith, trusting that only God and God will faithfully reward those acts of kindness. Lastly, I want to look at this parable that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35. And this becomes the example for the Christian of how we ought to determine the people we show kindness to and the degree to which we show that kindness. Jesus tells the parable of a man who is forgiven much by the king. The king wants to put him in prison and cause him to pay back the debt he owes. The debt was unpayable. He could not pay it realistically in multiple lifetimes. But then he's forgiven of that debt. Then he finds another person who owes him a quite insignificant amount of money relative to what he owed the king. And then he will not have compassion. He will not show kindness to that individual, though the person pleads with him for mercy. And then Jesus says this, the king says that you should have shown compassion because of the compassion that I showed to you. This is Matthew chapter 18 and verse 33. Shouldest thou not have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? Skipping in verse 35, Jesus makes the application. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also to you, if you from your hearts forgive not everyone his brother their trespasses. The model, the example, the template, the pattern after which we ought to show kindness is given us in the kindness that we have received from God. The kindness that Jesus has shown to us, that degree of kindness, that kind of kindness is the kindness that we are called to show to others. And what this story is saying is, if you have not really realized, if I have not realized the kindness that God has shown me, the degree of kindness that God has shown me, then it will be illustrated in the way I treat others. If I'm not kind to others, it's because I have not recognized the depth of the kindness that God has shown to me. And I see this as an example. The woman of the Shunammite woman demonstrates an example of this kindness. She showed kindness indiscriminately. Whether he was a great man, whether he was a no man, she showed kindness to Elisha. Then he even offers something in return. She says, I don't need anything. I'm not doing it for anything else. I am just showing kindness. And I believe it's because she knew that God had shown kindness to her. That's why she was blessed. That's why she was wealthy and rich, because God had shown her indiscriminate kindness, and in response, she showed that kind of kindness to others. Hopefully we can take this as an example. Hopefully we can look and meditate on the kindness that God has shown to us, the grace, the compassion, the pity that God has shown to us, and then we can lavishly bestow that on all within our sphere of influence.